Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode. My name is Mohammed Yunus, founder and CEO of vFairs, and today I'm thrilled to have a conversation with Nick, a leading expert in event marketing and strategy. With over 2 decades of experience in digital marketing and live events, Nick has dedicated his career to creating international and impactful event experiences. Nick, let's get started. Tell us a bit more about yourself, Zenus, and explain how Vision AI, like Zenus, and how it's used to measure attendee behavior.
Yeah, thanks for having me. As you said, I've been in the events industry for quite some time. I honestly, as a teenager in the 90s, was building websites. I also had a real job because, my dad told me that the internet would be a fad. So I worked in the events industry. Over time, I started merging those things together. I realized it's all just bringing people together, different tools for different things. I'm not someone who cares too much about how we bring together just the right tool for the right job. I found there was a big gap when it comes to understanding technology and the event space. Kind of positioned myself in the middle. I've been doing lots of presentations since about 2003 or 4 all over the world. And I had a consultancy. In that time, I met the team with Zenus, and I was like, oh, okay, this is what we need in events, which is we need to get the non-believers to believe in this. We needed to treat it like a channel where you put more in and you get more out, as opposed to an operating expense where they just say, can you do it with less? Can we just do it last year? That's not a growth mentality, but the missing piece was data and being able to explicitly tell stories. So I got really excited by the proposition of what they offered, came on full time, and I get to see the coolest things that you wouldn't see otherwise if you weren't really looking with the way that this technology lets you look.
And Nick, let's try to dig a bit more deeper into the technology itself, because
Yeah.
again, I've seen Zenus at IMAX, and I know that you guys work for a lot of other big conferences. Can you tell me exactly what are the top three things that it actually does that a typical event tech platform don't do? Like, we all, of course, analyze things based on check-in, based on the number of badges printed, based on the number of sessions check-in. What is Zenus doing that typically your customer comes to you for a technology like this one?
Yeah, I mean, the nice thing about it is it's really modular. So it's not a one size fits all. There are little sensors hooked up to a box that is running AI. The biggest thing is I'll describe what it is, and then people walk away with saying, so it's facial recognition. And actually it isn't. And it's a line we try to really underline, is the fact that facial recognition is a technology that a lot of people are aware of, where it is, guess what, recognizing faces. We're looking at faces, analyzing faces. We're not recognizing, in as much as we don't know who these people are as individuals. So what it's doing as a sensor is it's doing almost like object recognition. It's looking for things that are faces and things that are not. It doesn't know who you are individually. Additionally, there's no video and there's no photos. So it's just looking at it from a standpoint of numeric data. And it's analyzing hundreds of faces simultaneously, measuring the changes in those faces 5 times per second. And all of that doesn't sound like it. It's like, what does that have to do with events? So we could tell you, and we could aim one of these things at anything, and I could tell you the amount of impressions that got, the amount of dwell rate, how much time did people spend in that area? Were they passing through, or were they dedicated and looking at it? We can also, and this is probably the key metric, we can tell you the energy of a group. So we do that by looking for, with facial training in AI, to determine when a positive sentiment reaction takes place. The more it happens with more faces in that group, the more that it validates that actually took place as an experience, and then it timestamps that. So we can tell you, you have a sign somewhere and someone paid for that logo to be there right now. What do you say for ROI? Well, it was there. We sold this many tickets. We can say that sign, that booth, that activation, well, this many people were there, this many people were engaged with it, this many people had a positive experience. We have some demographic information we can tell as well without getting into individualized data. So we can tell you if the person or the groups, an average of how many of them were above 40, under 40, biological male, biological female. Really what we're aiming towards is the digital world gets so many awesome metrics that the in-person has never had the opportunity to have. And this is sort of equalizing that on footage. So especially with organizations that are wise enough to have a hybrid strategy, now they can start to put those together and see that they're very harmonious. They work together really well because the language is the same.
Yeah. And again, let's take an example of IMAX, right? Like I think a lot of people listening to the podcast would know about IMAX. IMAX is
Sure.
one of the best events within our industry. What are, and again, we don't need to know their specific numbers, but I'm trying to understand is that, okay, what are three things that any customer would care the most about when looking into, again, among so many things that Zenus does capture. And after they have captured some of those things, for example, facial expressions and, how happy they were and so forth, what do they do with it? How does it help them knowing about those numbers? For example, I go to a concert, and again, everyone over there is happy because it's a concert. And again, even if Zenus is there, when it tells you that, by the way, people were there, were happy, what do you do about it? So tell me a bit more on those maybe three most important metrics that your customers say that, by the way, knowing this was helpful in this way because I was able to, I don't know, change this or improve on that. So if you can just guide us a bit more on that.
Yeah, I mean, you went right to it, which is great. I think a lot of people, they think, oh, geez, I need to collect more data. I should do some things and get some data. That's not the mentality. The mentality is, what are you going to do with it? Okay, once you know something, what next? So if you don't know the action, it's sort of not that valuable. I will say this, comparisons are something that we're really great at. So we have all this data that we collect from all deployments across the event spectrum. So we have benchmarks. So was this good objectively? Pass, fail, sort of a binary way. Not the best way to use it, but it's an intro way. Was this a good session? Was this a good activation? We can tell you that better when you have multiple deployments. Were we better than last year in this metric? Are we improving? Did we change our designs in a way that kept people in there longer? I have an example of an activation coming up next month, another industry show. And in that, we're at IMAX, and they're looking at determining if the activation they have is too long. Now, how do you know if it's too long? So we have these things where you combine the metrics and it starts to tell a story. You have high dwell rates, high sentiment, great experience. That's what you want. High dwell rates, low sentiment, you're in a line and you don't like that line. So knowing that, through that, there's a lot of people around, we must be doing our job, actually may or may not be true. The depth that you get from combining the metrics tells that a lot. So that's one of the things that IMAX specifically looks at. I think most people do, but they really use it. And they say, we want to know where the congestion is, where there's positive. We want to know the congestion where it's negative, because they're not just, all you can look at as a person who's in the trenches at the event is it felt busy. Busy could be bad. Busy could be good, depending on that sentiment, which is really a metric of return on experience, and we don't have a lot of those in the live events. Most of the time, the only metric that we really live and die on are ticket sales and leads generated, if there's even places where there's leads generated. So this gives you kind of a trending analysis as to what's coming. Especially, we work with organizations that have, IMAX is another great example of this, the buying cycle really long. You're talking to someone, it's like, well, I have my show figured out until 2030, but I'm looking at, 5 years from now. Now, are you going to renew with that show because they didn't, none of those people converted within 6 months? No, because they don't convert in 6 months. So you need leading metrics, the trending metrics, to tell you, when I'm doing these things, when my buying cycle happens, it ends up being positive. That happens all the time in digital marketing. You'll be able to see these indicators to be able to determine this is going right. We're improving on these leading metrics, which will eventually turn into MQLs and SQLs. Events don't work like that. They don't even think like that. They just think, well, we're having a good time. We sold a lot of tickets. Very soft. And being able to take these metrics, and this is what another thing that is like a top 3 use case is, we give these metrics to give to field marketers, to give it to event organizers, so they can report up with some confidence. This works, this could be improved. Here's where it could improve. Under 40 people didn't seem to get this presentation. We had a good example of all they knew was the leads in this booth, quite a big booth, were really low. Didn't know why. We had sensors on the outside, sensors on the inside. The outside had the demographics being very analogous to what the demographics should be at the event. Inside the booth, however, way out of whack, like by and large, disproportionately biological female. What does that mean? You actually had, I came from web design years and years ago. You had a bounce rate of males. Like, why high bounce? Turns out all they could see with their designs, now that they knew what to look for, as opposed to just a bad booth. We needed this many people. We didn't get it. We're going to pull our money out. You don't want that stuff, right? Or we need a new design completely. Flip the coin again, do something else. That's what we do now. With those metrics, they were able to look at it and say, oh, geez, I wonder if it's the fact that the only thing they could see was people doing yoga was the male bounce rate. And they didn't think that because we all have blind eyes. They were in the Silicon Valley, so they thought everybody did yoga. So the next day, they moved the mats to the back in a different space, and they saw something that was more, broad, and they had a 300% increase in overall traffic inside the booth the next day. So things like that, to be able to illuminate what the real story is, as opposed to just all this sort of binary guesswork that we do, are the things that, and again, you're saying, what do they do with it? They go, we want to make sure that maybe we're keeping them too long, maybe not long enough. We want to make sure that we have this demo over here and a different demo over here. Which one's better? We can A/B test to determine, the experience. So there's lots of ways, but you were, hopefully people think exactly like you, and they say, so what do you do with it? And start there.
Yeah. Nick, how hard it is to set up? So again, it looks like you said you have to install sensors up. So tell me a bit more on the lead time, installation time. How does that part typically work?
Geez, I got one around here somewhere. So it's one of the best stories of what this is. This is definitely one of the things that got me into the company. I think our boxes are a little bit smaller now even. So what we do is we look at the floor plan and we determine, what do you want to measure? Because it's not an all or nothing proposition. You just want to measure this activation over here, or a VIP, whatever. It could be a little bit, whatever it is. It's a little box like this. This is where the computing power is happening. Then the sensors like this. You can gaff tape this to things. You can do anything. And that's the whole footprint. It has its own internet, and it goes up in real time. Once you plug those things in, it takes I don't know. The hardest part is just to get the line of sight pointed at it right. We have teams that can come out and do it for you. We can certainly train people. We have an app that allows another person to go through the whole process themselves. Lots of different ways. Plus, Freeman is a company that deploys for us. So there's lots of different options, but in minutes, and it's plug and play. Plug it in, there it is. If somebody, the worst case scenario with the platform itself, it becomes unplugged. Usually someone wants to plug their phone in. That immediately sends a text to our team, or who we have specifically signed up, even if it's internal or external, and then they just know to plug it in. That's the only thing that happens. It stores it locally. It stores it online, in real time. And because it's not video and not photos, it's 1 meg of data up an hour, which is like a tenth of a photo. It's just a data stream. So it's very light in from an infrastructure standpoint, and from a standpoint of the actual process itself. I put one in my book bag. I go and present somewhere. I tape it to my mic stand. I point it at the crowd, and I'm good to go. I start showing them their reactions to the presentation in real time.
Interesting. Nick, just purely from an accuracy perspective, see, all of these conferences attracts people from all over the world. I know, clearly different faces, different ways of expressing happiness, anger, etc. Again, have people ever questioned about the accuracy of this? And then,
they do.
And then the second question is, what's the alternate of this one? Because one way of doing that is, okay, I'm giving you real-time feedback based on the facial expression analysis, right? That's one. Or B, I know, and you tell me, I'm not so familiar with this part of the industry. The other one is, oh, by the way, there's a survey just after that particular activation or wherever these things are installed, where you can literally ask them, the things that you're trying to analyze. So tell me a bit more on both of those topics, just purely on the accuracy piece.
Accuracy, and then where does it come into the active data collection too? Because we're more of a passive. So on the accuracy part, there is a lot of junk science out there as far as AI's ability to discern a single face and specific emotions. The variance of how you or I might react to something. There's so many X factors. Could be language, could be emotional, could be neurodivergency, so many things, right? So our technology will not give you accurate results if you point it at one person. It just doesn't work like that. It requires the confidence of groups of people. That's why we deploy in large events, or we don't deploy we don't have an HR functionality to determine if someone's paying attention or that stuff, or are they feeling guilty, or they, we don't do any of that stuff. In fact, we call it attendee energy. Behind the scenes, what we're looking for is any number of positive sentiment reactions. So if you tick any one of the boxes of those things, then it senses it in other faces simultaneously. because it determines based on the proximity and the way that they're looking at the sensor that they're all experiencing the same thing. So what happens is a validation.
Mhm.
This happens with you. It looks for others. It happens with them. But we need at least 30. Let's say in that 30, there's 2 people who just don't understand what's going on. They're not fun people. They don't smile. It would just be because it's median aggregated data, they would just be weeded out. And that's what we're providing. We're providing a trend analysis of what was responded in there. If you looked at one person and you laugh when people say, cruel things, well, the data goes out of the window, right? So we're looking for those groups of people in order to do that. And we're not looking for very specific types of emotional reactions. We're looking for any one of them that would be bucketed into a positive sentiment.
Okay.
So that's how we do that. So we don't overpromise by saying like, well, we can do it for 4 people or put it in a training seminar with 5 people, or we're looking to tell you who's lying or who's not. We don't overpromise that. Like positive sentiment, groups over 30, we're about 95% accurate. The training that's done, especially with like different ethnicities and different like backgrounds and such, is done with a group that we access in addition to a lot of other proprietary AI training that we've done. But there's a group called Fairface that we use that is kind of like the industry standard for this kind of thing. As it comes to active data collection, that's our best friend. Like we'll have conversations with people and it's like, oh, great, I can get rid of my post-event survey data, of which 5% of people react, or respond to, and it's all 1s and 5s anyway. And we say, no, don't do that. Like we're proponents of data collection and storytelling, period. Don't cut anything out. It's not that expensive. It's not that hard to do. The context, what we can tell you is something happened there. In this moment, this is an outlier action. Like my example of why are the men not coming in? They're on this side, but they're not on this side. So then we can ask questions. But the questions are often answered within the sort of anecdotal evidence that is in the active data collection of survey work. So that work still illuminates. It helps a lot. So like we have a data team that takes that in, and that we can look. We can just give you the data, and you can have access to it. You can have it in raw. You can have it in our dashboard, whatever. But oftentimes people are accessing our team to be able to then look at the data and then make tell stories of what happened or what's next or what you should do. The survey data helps a lot in that. So like we feel that we're pretty complementary. Passive data collection and active data collection, they both have, pros and cons, but together really winning combination.
Nick, just coming back to just again, when you deploy this into a session as well as into a conference, again, I was just thinking about myself. I attend some of these sessions. They are 45 minutes to 60 minutes long. And during that one session, me being the job that I am in, I will get an SMS and I will get a Slack message and so forth, right? So while I'm, 90% attentive, sometimes 10% I am not, and my reactions may change over the period of that 45 minutes session.
Totally.
So tell me a bit more about that piece. Is Zenus primarily, is sessions analysis part of one of the use case, or is it purely around activation and so forth? And then how do you cater to that, given most of us, unfortunately, are a bit distracted during any 30 to 45 minute session, right? So just trying to understand a bit more on that one.
Yeah.
And again, as these things are being recorded also, are these timestamped? Which is, again, as you mentioned, for example, if I'm telling a story, and again, we'll discuss your code data and boring your stories. Stories keeps us active, and sometimes the stats and everything else, I don't know how much. But tell me a bit more about, are we able to tie it back to specific, minute or specific seconds so that we know when people were super engaged versus not, and can tie it to different activation sessions that were running at the same time around that area?
Yeah. So it is by the second. It's just running all the time. I mean, if we're in a multi-day session, we drop the sensor in there. Even while everyone's sleeping, it's still in there. Again, 500 faces simultaneously measuring the changes 5 times per second. It's still 1 meg of data up an hour. It's like nothing. So it's always doing that, and it's always against time. So you keep it in the same room, and you have session after session, and you just go into our tool and say, this is at this period, this is at this period. That way you can compare things, and you can look at that even though we're just collecting it the whole time. So attention, really interesting thing. I mean, that's really where it comes in on looking at aggregated data. So yes, you may get that Slack message. I mean, everything you described is how I consume at present. I mean, I'm a presenter. I'm the worst as far as attendee. I'm doing the same thing too. I'm listening. Maybe I'm used to podcasts where I can just listen to things and do something else. So what happens is that because it's an aggregate and because it's median data, the chances of that ping or whatever attention area happening for everyone at the same time is pretty minimal, right? So once you start becoming like an outlier at this second or an outlier at that second, you get to see that it doesn't matter as much. So like it really works out in the aggregate. Additionally, we're looking for positive sentiment. Like I said, I'm not over promising on what we're doing. We're not looking for tears or boredom or whatever. So you have to really think in the confines of, we basically tell you two things. We tell you a peak and a trough of energy. We're looking at trends and we're looking at against time. So there's a few different analysis, like what do you do with this information if you can do that? One is, like you said, 45 minutes, 60 minutes, that's where most of the things you're going to. Is that too long? Some people make broad statements frequently. Like I'm on a guest on things all the time and they're like, oh, so what's the trend? What's the time period? And I'm like, no one's going to like the data guy because I'm going to say it depends every time. And it's like, oh, what a bummer. Like I just want an answer. But it really depends. Like it's specifically in industries. Like it's good to get a benchmark for your industry, for your audience, for your members, whatever it is. Because like certain scientific based industries, medical science, pharmaceuticals, we look at like 2-hour sessions and like they're pretty steady. So you can determine what's the length, that's optimal for your group. By the way, big finding shouldn't, be too crazy. The more salespeople are that are attending your event, those are the ones you have to have in like 10 minutes, 5 minutes. I don't know, do it fast. They have zero attention span. If they have some kind of sales role, forget it. But depending on like the job titles and the industry, it really makes a big difference. So measuring those things and understanding that your audience might be different than everybody else's, you might find that you've been following conventional wisdom that's broad that doesn't apply to you. You might be the opposite. So that's something that's really, really important to get a benchmark for. But because we're looking at big groups of people, and the more people that we have, the more validation that you can't hide it. It's passively collected. And once a joke is told, you see the joke. I mean, it's pretty great. We had an instance where I was looking at data with a keynote that had Bill and Hillary Clinton on stage, and he was telling jokes, and the jokes hit, and she was being smart, and that sustained energy. The fascinating part of that information was there was also a group of people. Again, we don't know who they are, but there was just a segment that were just unchanged, no matter what. Told a joke, nothing. This, and it was just like, you could identify it. So it was just like, our hypothesis on that is like, because they were so politically charged as speakers, people went in and they're like, I'm here, I've got to be here, but I don't want to, I'm like shutting out emotionally, which is interesting. Do you want to invest in speakers with, if you're trying to change people and they come in with a preconceived notion they can't be changed, is that good? Is that acceptable? Because these are the kind of questions that we don't answer, but we show you that like, this is a thing that's happening. It's an outlier behavior. It's either not happened before in other sessions that you have at your event or historically, because we keep all the data associated with the client in their dashboard and they have the ability to compare these things. So like that tells you even stuff like, should we start 1 hour or later in the day for our sessions? Like you could do day 1, day 2, or year 1, the next year, A/B test that to determine the energy. So it's that sometimes you see high marks for sessions and it's the speaker. Sometimes it's the topic because you see the speaker somewhere else and then they didn't have that consistent, thing. So then, okay, it's not, I'm not, keeping the same, what we do right now is if it worked, we just repeat, but we don't know what to repeat. It could be doubling down on topics like that, or it could be doubling down on who that was because their delivery mechanism, or there could be a way that they delivered that you could approach and deliver it for other things. So it really goes in. You have to be really curious. You have to ask good questions and you have to create forks in the road. So then when we measure it, we go, okay, great. If they go this way, then we know we're going to double down on this. And that's the thing that digital marketers have been doing for a long time now. Like everything's A/B test. Everything is, you don't just write the one subject line or have the one segment. Like that's how it goes. In events, we just haven't had the ability to measure those things. So I really don't think we've been funded as much or taken as seriously as we should be. We know, everyone knows we move the dial, but prove it. Prove it to a CFO, and say, this is the impact. So the session part it's a big use case for us, but a bigger use case ends up being in the activations and the exhibiting. not because it's any different as far as like the output. It's just there's money tied to it. So if you can tell an exhibitor, where'd my money go? And they go explicitly right here. They go, great, here's the money for next year. And that becomes a real easy, keep working with us thing.
And Nick, I have a few more questions about Zenus, but I'll come to just in general event industry related some topics that I always love to ask our guests. Your top 3 conferences that you like to attend as an attendee. Like what are your top 3 favorite ones?
I'm like, I have friendships and relationships with all these people. So
they're all good.
It's all good. So I guess we've said it, the 12th time we're going to get like some kind of balloons are going to drop on us, but I feel like you can't miss IMEX and, pick one, I guess, if you can go both, whatever. The reason is it's the good pulse check. I mean, it's really the state of the industry takes place there for sure. I can get into like all the specifics. I don't think I have to really oversell it. They're doing great. Convening leaders is another one that I can't miss every year. I mean, there's a few reasons why, oddly, and probably not in their marketing. Beginning of the year, I need a recharge. It's like the perfect time. So I love that. I also love the fact that their education is, again, I'm going to maybe, you can't all be number one, but it's the best. And the reason is I think, is that the audience is so discerning. So like, I love like, and my third one will be probably AE's Expo. So like Expo, like their education's great too. The thing is that every single person at Convening Leaders, they're generally tasked with some element of education in their shows, and it's like a priority. So when the audience is really, I used to go to a catering show, and caterers, when they eat food, they're really discerning. I've been to audiovisual shows, and they really care about the audiovisual. At Convening Leaders, these are people who put on education-based conferences, so the education's like high. I've seen people from like NASA, and like I said, they have they have like big name people there frequently. So that one, and then like I said, I'm a big into trade shows. I think that's like where we can really show a lot of our ROI as far as the explicit value of events. So Expo with IAE does that as good or better, I would say, than anybody. That's kind of my pulse check on that part of the industry. Like what are we doing? What new technologies? There's almost always new technologies at that show. I don't know. I mean, what are your favorite shows? I'll put you on the spot. How's it feel?
Yeah, no, I would love to. So again, I have to say, I didn't know about Convening Leaders. I just made a note of that because I have never been there.
You should go.
Don't know much about it. So I've heard about Expo a lot. I have never been there myself, but again, just making a note for myself also.
Yeah.
Ones that I typically attend, or again, I'm familiar too. Again, IMEX is there right at the top. I love it. Again, we go there more as an exhibitor. So even for us, Event Tech Live, the one in London one.
Yeah, Adam puts on a great show. Yeah.
So I love that one. So again, if I have to pick 3, so it's IMEX, the US one first, the Frankfurt one second, and then the Event Tech Live. So these are the 3.
Yeah, Event Tech Live would have been my next one for sure. I'm just looking at like superlatives. Like for me, like if I'm me as a person of meeting all and talking to all my favorite people and just getting absolutely excited about where we're going with technology, ETL is tough to beat. I mean, all the best minds are there. And what happens at that show, which is like not, again, something that you see on maybe the marketing, but I always find this like probably the highest value. You see organic partnerships between technology companies happening in the aisleways, like everywhere, like restaurants everywhere. Everyone's like, how can we work together? Because we're all singing the same song.
Yep. And again, I just recently attended the one in Barcelona.
IBTM,
yeah. So that's
a great show too. I've been there as well.
Yeah, just attended it this year, and it was pretty good show. So again, went there as an attendee, trying to see like what's in there, and again, pretty impressive show. I have to say.
It's a really, and I mean, plus you can't beat Barcelona. It's a beautiful city.
Exactly. So that's the first one. The second one is just your take on swags. Again, are they good? Are they not? And again, how do you, if they are good, like what is the swag that actually acts as the purpose that people take swags with, which is again, people remember the brand, people just relate to it or somehow or the other. What are some of the favorite swags that you have collected that you feel that, what was worth the money that exhibitors spend on swags?
I feel like, I mean, I usually don't have to go too far to find something that's like a swag item. Like,
same here. I have all of my swags and badges and everything else just literally on my table.
I'm not gonna show you the who did it, but air tags and tiles. Can't beat those. There's a logo on the other side. So I think meeting in person, the reason that we still do it and the reason that we get in planes and the reason that we find babysitters and maybe have, emails that pile up and just pain associated with it that's real, is because when we come together, we accelerate trust. And I think that like some memory marker or something that is tangible to remind about the trust that was gained. I mean, that's me philosophically. I'm not trying to sell at trade shows. I'm trying to earn your trust and I'm trying to show you value, in everything that I do. So I think if you're really strategic, I think the bar is really low to be different, so I think different's pretty easy, but the real challenge is finding something that connects with them as an individual, and it connects with them in a way that it makes it not just, I remember them because the logo was so big, but I remember them because it was thoughtful. Geez, I have some coming up at specifically at Convening Leaders because we're measuring all the activations that take place there. There's some ones that are like all this custom stuff that I think is really great. There's one that I know Detroit is doing that is a custom like scent. And it's an experience where they brought this company in, and it's something that we would never be able to do, but like they ask you questions and they're working with you almost in a consultative nature in order to create like a kind of scent thing that you can use for whatever. And there's different ones. Yeah. And I'm like, I don't even know what that would look like, like, yeah. I mean, I had some ones that, look, the t-shirt ones usually get a big line, and in IMEX, there was people doing hats that I saw had a huge line. Custom, if you want to give people something with like a low carbon footprint, which usually is the negative criticism to swag, I saw a really great activation that had people, an artist doing a portrait of the person in their coffee, and they already had all of these kind of like things holding the phone, so you put your phone there. What an Instagram experience, right? And be able to facilitate that. You're going to show people for the rest of your life that, right? So
I asked him question to Adam, and he mentioned like for his show, like he has seen that swags that are for your kids,
yes,
are very popular because we're all traveling. We know that we have to go back home, and if there's something for kids that always saves you, So
there's a book on that really gets if someone is really interested in swag and trying to crack the code on it. There's a book by a guy named John Rulin called Giftology, and it is corporate gifting strategy. And a lot of the strategy revolves around don't get something for someone, get something for their family. And he used to give like Cutco knives where they would put like the name of the person's like wife in there or husband or whatever. Super interesting, but like, a little bit of research and but yeah, I having some kind of experience that is like quote unquote Instagrammable is something that, immediately generally has a pretty low footprint. And if you're, there to have experiences to change people anyway, a pen isn't an experience.
Yeah. I'll tell you also just one other thing I noticed at IBTM. So there was Visit Japan booth, and they were giving Japanese hand fan. And then there were ones that were just literally there. You can pick it up. And again, it's Japanese fan. It's still okay and fun. But then there was a line where they were writing your name in Japanese on the same fan.
Ooh.
And there was a line for like 45 minutes just because people wanted to see how their name, I don't know, looks like in Japanese language on the pen. But then I was like, that's thoughtful and that's nice and interesting. And people are willing to wait for 30 to 45 minutes.
That's one of the things that we measure, honestly, is that line good or bad?
Yeah.
And that Visit Detroit thing, they were like very transparent. They're like, we're going to try this scent thing out. Like we've gone through it. Like the output is awesome. It's really cool. It's not fast. So we have to be able to measure what the threshold is. So like we can give them like the output on that. So like we look at those kinds of experiences and like, I agree that there's like a line. And if you can keep them entertained and there's different facets of what the experience is or whatever else, then you get the best case, but you're up against the worst case, which is wasting people's time.
True. Yeah. Again, and expensive. When you're attending a conference,
really
like those half an hour, 1 hour cost you a lot of money.
Yeah. Iterative approach for that is definitely great. And being able to like evaluate it. Like I used to do consultative work where I would do experience audits where you'd go at events and look at different activations and whatever and experience it as sort of a secret shopper. And then be able to tell like, that's not a bad audit system because we're not going to be, we're going to slant it in our favor. So it needs to be something that's third party and you need to have a culture that's, able to take it. To take the potential criticism because the criticism is for iterative improvement, not pass fail. No one fails. I mean, the hardest part in events is, I think, the reason that I've made a career is that in the events, it's pass fail frequently is the mentality. In tech, it's all good. Like you pivot, you go in the direction, like it's just data. So you just keep improving a little bit from both sides, understanding both sides' place in that would do a lot of good.
Yeah. Like my last question, I know that we are up against time, and I know the default answer would be depends, but I'll still try to challenge
Give you a
you.
good one. Yeah,
Try to challenge you to pick a side, even though, yeah, I know it's
pick
really,
a
really
side,
hard.
whatever it is.
Registration forms, long ones, small ones, and there are two takes on it. If you have to capture information, capture it just all in one go because you really need that information. Or B, let them register, purchase a ticket, and then try to capture additional information. You have been both an attendee and event planner, so you see both sides. You know the pros and cons of each. So
I do.
what's your take on that?
So the biggest X factor in all of this that has changed my feelings about all of it is generative AI. So with generative AI, I have the ability to comb through and find, in sentiment where there wasn't sentiment expressly given. I can find things that I want very specifically when I want it. So my feelings went from a sort of love-hate relationship to post-event survey to more positive feelings about it because I can sift through the dirt to find the gold. So I'm a data person, so I'm going to like data before, middle, and after. I do think that intent data should be here and post, experience should be here. And I also think one of the biggest survey things that is not taken advantage of is the fact that it's my belief that if your strategy for improvement of your events is based solely on your post-event survey, it's not the right data. It's actually suffering from survivor bias because those people bought a ticket.
Yep.
What you should do is you should also survey and segment out the people who saw your marketing material and didn't convert. That's your growth potential. So,
Interesting.
yeah, look at one as a retention strategy and the other as a growth strategy. Ask them different questions. So I guess my answer of my variation of it depends is segment it out. Ask different questions at different times and know who your audience is.
Brilliant point. Never thought of it that way. Thanks for sharing. Nick, just one last thing. People who want to reach out to you, learn a bit more about you, connect with you, as well as about Zenus, where they can find you.
Yeah. My email address is nick.borelli at zenus.ai. LinkedIn, really easy to find me. I am starting to stack up my messages because it's Monday, but that's just Nick Borelli after the IN, LinkedIn, all that stuff. Easy to find.
Perfect. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Nick, for listening. Guys, those of you who want to connect with Nick is active on LinkedIn. I just, I follow him also on LinkedIn. So, you can never miss him out over there. Thank you, Nick, so much for your time today. I learned a lot about Zenus, about just in general about event and some of the great events that you have been part of. Thank you so much for your time.
Appreciate it.
And, we'll all see you next week.
Thanks.